How about road versus way?
Well, I think I just shared with you, I believe in legal, safe, medically safe, affordable, and available women's reproductive rights.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm from HWS, and you briefly touched on women equity, and I'm currently in a women's studies class, and we have been talking about the Kavanaugh. And so I was just wondering, what were your thoughts about the Kavanaugh accusations?
I believe that there should be an FBI investigation. There was with the Anita Hill, and at this point especially, I just think it's the appropriate path. Thank you for your question. What are you studying? Is it women's studies or?
Well, that's part of one of the courses I'm taking, but I'm a media and society major.
Oh, neat. Good. Thanks.
Speak about your views of the Second Amendment.
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak on my views on the Second Amendment, but as Bette Davis said in All About Eve, buckle your seatbelts, it's going to be a bumpy ride tonight, all right? So hang in there. Because I have a position that is relatively unique on the political landscape, at least in the midterm elections, from what I have learned and heard from around the United States. I am a supporter of the Second Amendment, just as I am a supporter of the First and Third and Fourth and so forth and so on. I believe that we should do everything that we can to fully tighten and make airtight background checks and in the system that we have at the federal level, and that we maintain all of the criminal liabilities that apply if a seller, for example, does not do the check or does the check, finds a profit, and still sells the gun or the firearm. All right, ready? Here's the first part. Here's what maybe some of you won't like, so hang on. I do not believe that we need any more regulations than we have after that on responsible gun owners. However, I feel very strongly that Congress should repeal the immunity it has given gun manufacturers and owners to civil suits. Congress in 2005 gave immunity to gun manufacturers and gun sellers. It was also an era, by the way, in which they gave the telecommunication companies immunity to suits violating civil rights and privacy, because that was the era in which the Bush administration, after 9/11, just went right into the telecommunication companies, put on those alligator clips, and were violating the law in that case. So the telecommunication companies, knowing that they were doing it because they were right there in the buildings where the communications take place, went running to Congress and said, if we're going to let you do this without telling the public, you have to give us immunity to civil suits. And they gave them immunity. And the gun manufacturers and the gun sellers took a page out of that book and went to Congress, and now they cannot be sued in a civil case. I believe that is a violation of my and your Seventh Amendment rights. You have a right to a trial in a civil court, to be adjudged by a jury of our peers. And Congress has taken that right away. So I don't want to hear about protection of the Second Amendment unless someone is going to protect our Seventh Amendment.
There you go.
It also, by the way, affords an opportunity that if people in Manhattan, in civil cases against manufacturers and sellers, want to say it is negligent to sell an assault rifle in Manhattan, but the people in the 23rd district or the judicial districts are not exactly congressional districts, but you get my idea, in a different place with a different culture, that if it's not negligent, then we can have local governance on this issue, because the issue of gun ownership and use is different up here than it is in Manhattan. And we do have to respect that. I really do mean that sincerely. I do not believe that the gun owners that I know are irresponsible. My father was one, all of his brothers, all of my cousins. I'm a gun owner. The people I know are responsible gun owners. But I am not so sure about the manufacturers that have put profit before people and continue to push firearms out onto this market when research demonstrates that is the number one reason. It is the reason why we are the number one country in the world with mass murders. The number one country. Do you want to know what the second country is? Yemen, and they're in the middle of a civil war. So let's address this problem where the responsibility genuinely lies. I do not believe it is with responsible gun owners. I think it's with the gun manufacturers and, to some degree, gun sellers. Yes, sir.
I just want a clear answer on the gun rights and responsible gun owners. Here in this area, we've seen domestic violence and domestic abuse really take a turn for the worse. And when you see responsible gun owners have red flags and issues where maybe they get the police called, but they don't get charges pressed on them, do you believe in red flag legislation and taking guns away from people who have shown clear violence towards their partners or the people in their lives?
So in family court, if an allegation is made of violence against an individual who is a gun owner, or if there are guns in the home, whether they're the owner or not, the guns are removed. And at the end of due process, should that allegation be found to be false, there is a process to get the guns back. In criminal court, it follows a different path. You have to prove the harassment before the guns are taken away. In the United States, most of the gun violence is in a domestic setting. I think the law is okay where it is at this point. I think there is enough violence that is domestic violence that even at an allegation, it is appropriate for law enforcement to impound the guns until it is proven that that allegation is false. It's over 60% of gun violence in this country is in a domestic setting. And to your point, sir, it's mostly against women. So let's protect women. Let's protect ourselves. Let's make sure our process is appropriate and correct. And I think we're okay when it comes to people who are not responsible gun owners. Someone who is finally adjudicated to have been involved in domestic violence is not a responsible gun owner by definition. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Jim Kennedy from here in Geneva. What are your thoughts, without tipping your hand, on your strategy on the upcoming debates with Congressman Reed, and how important are they? And secondly, what are your campaign's plans to reach out to populations that do not look like the majority of the people in this room?
Well, those are two big questions, so I hope I keep track of all of it. Ryan, you can keep me on the path. With respect to the debates, I think it's very telling that Mr. Reed has accepted 2 of the debates from the 8 invitations both his campaign and mine received. One of those debates is not a debate open to the public. It is an interview with the editor and staff of the Post-Journal in Jamestown. It is not open to the public. And I think it's also very telling that Mr. Reed has congregated them geographically, or may I say gerrymandered them, into one corner of this very large geographic district, Corning, Orleans, and this other thing in Jamestown, and has, I think, disrespected people here in Ontario, in Seneca, in Tioga, in Tompkins, and Chemung, and I could continue to go on. Schuyler, right? There are 11 counties in this district, and he's chosen only 3 in one corner geographically to do it. And finally, he's doing it all at the very end of the congressional season and race. which I don't believe gives voters what they deserve, an opportunity to have an ongoing conversation about his views, my views, and what you think. And I'm going to add one more thing, because his communication director has been mischaracterizing in at least 3 journals now the nature of discussion on this point. Mark, please take this right back to Abby. She has said to presses that we, as in his campaign and mine, agreed to 3 debates. That is not the case. We were given 8 invitations. We accepted 8. He accepted 3. We never had a conversation. We never had a discussion. We never had a negotiation about what we, the royal we, were doing. So I'm sorry, either consciously, intentionally, or mistakenly, Ms. Doherty is misspeaking on the facts. You asked me about how to reach out to minority communities.
Yes.
We're doing everything we can. Everything we can to reach out to those communities. We have Spanish-speaking people going to communities in Yates and Ontario County and in Chautauqua, where the largest population of Spanish-speaking people reside. We have people going into the African-American communities where they reside. It's almost exclusively in urban communities. We have, I mean, you should know there's only 5% of the population of this district is listed as a minority. But yes, we are making every attempt to do that. But I want to add a little editorial thought to that. I get that question a lot. Civil rights has always been important to me. One of the first things I did as a college student was be active in the anti-apartheid movement. So what I'm going to say is not at the disadvantage of a position on civil rights, but I think it is a disservice, in fact, to the African-American community, the Hispanic community, even the student community. They're kind of a minority in a way too, no matter what their race or ethnicity. That somehow the society is waiting for a campaign to do all of that work. We need to be doing that work all the time. So I will answer that question proudly, but we need to be doing that work all the time. Don't wait for someone to run for Congress to suddenly expect them to do it. I mean, I will do it. You do understand what I'm saying. I am trying to get more people involved in this effort. And I find that when people just lay it at the doorstep of a campaign that is struggling for every penny to get the word out in this race, we are there. But we need the help all the time to have all the people involved. And I hope that we take some lesson in that. May I say a little bit spontaneously about where we are in the campaign and what we see and strategy and so forth? Because it's related to the money. A few data points. Polls, both Republican and Democratic, show that no matter who Mr. Reed would have run against, he would start 10 points ahead on the basis of name recognition. His ballot number, however, is 45, which is, as we say in Italian, mezzo mezzo. 50's good, 40's bad, 45's right in the middle. We can push that number down. If you as a voter are inclined to want to do that. Here's where the problem lies for us. That 10 points is name recognition. How do we charge into changing that percentage point? Door to door, phone banking, lawn signs, tell your neighbors, have a party. And I am sorry to say, please give us money. Mr. Reed started with $2.2 million. He is flooding your house with his pamphlets. You could probably paper your kitchen with them at this point. He is on every form of digital and will be all of the media from social networking and right on through to television. He has way more money than we do. to get the name out. So I am asking you to help me do what he doesn't have. The people who really believe in the politics, getting out and letting people know that when he says single payer is socialism, it's a lie. When his communication director says, we agreed to 3 debates, now why is the Mitrano campaign saying something different? It's a lie. And I could go on. But for the sake of brevity, the difference here is, if you believe in this campaign, you will work for it. And it's the only way we're going to get change in this district. The gentleman in the back there, go ahead, and then for sure this gentleman.
Is this on? Yes. Okay. My name is Pete Tarzino. I'm from Oaks Corners. I am going door to door for you in Seneca Falls. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. I did want to backtrack a little bit about gun rights. It's an issue near and dear to my heart, and I agree with you profoundly that gun owners, most of them, are very responsible. In fact, I see no movement on the issue until they stand up to the NRA and say enough. I really do. With that being said, I wanted to ask you about reasonable restrictions to constitutional rights. I remember a beloved college professor always telling us there are reasonable restrictions. You can't stand up in a crowded movie theater and yell fire. Freedom of speech does not give you that. So I was just wondering, what kind of reasonable restrictions, if any, do you see on the ownership of weapons? You know, there's the Second Amendment giving the right to own a tank. A nuclear weapon. I mean, so I'm just wondering if there's some reasonable restrictions on that right. Thank you.
Yes, sir, Peter, thank you. You are absolutely right. There is no right that we have under the Constitution that is pure and absolute. Even notwithstanding language such as Congress shall pass no law. About the First Amendment, Congress has passed lots of law. There are time, place, and manner restrictions on speech. Child pornography is per se illegal. So is obscenity. Although that's a little harder to appreciate. That's where that famous phrase comes, I know it when I see it, because it's hard to determine. But in fact, we do have restrictions on every single one of our constitutional rights. So if a jury determines that the sale of, and I'm going to say something that doesn't even exist in law, but just to make the point, a fully automatic assault weapon with a cartridge of 1,000 bullets. And the question comes up, how could the jury be allowed to do that? That's a government restriction on my Second Amendment right. I am sure that it would be well within the topic of a reasonable restriction. But now let me be, even more pointed. What if someone goes to court and sues a manufacturer and says, if this trigger had a fingerprint technology on it, the 5-year-old child that got a hold of it mistakenly thinking it was a toy and killed her brother would not have happened. I believe that could be found to be a legitimate decision that a jury would make as well. The fact of the matter is, we in this country have used tort law to get improvements in products, in services, and this is how we do reform in the United States, is through tort law, civil law, people suing in a civil court. And I believe that this is the only way we're going to properly address this issue, because the NRA is too powerful. When they get these bills in Congress, they will define it to death. What's an assault rifle? How many seconds per bullet? I mean, that's what's happened traditionally. I really don't think there's a path in Congress. It should go back to the people to answer these questions in the time-honored way that we do in the United States. And I'll say one more thing. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the NRA, caring more about profit than people, don't give a hoot, really, about reasonable individuals' guns rights. And they'll sacrifice them. And in a way, I believe my position is more defensible than Mr. Reed's for reasonable gun owners, because in this country, instead of having these pendulum swings of way out one way and then the big restrictions come in, I'm against the SAFE Act. for example. It's overly broad. It, I think, encompasses a whole vague definition of mental illness. This is an example where the pendulum swings out too far and it affects individuals adversely. Let's bring it right into the courts and let's get big business out. NRA is like any other big business that is giving Mr. Reed and politicians like him money to vote the way they want because they want to make money. They're putting money before politics. I believe the people in this district, because I'm out talking to you in the collective sense every night, are tired of money corrupting politics. You want a representative who's going to represent you and not some corporations.
Hi, Tracy. John Hurley. How are you tonight? Thank you for coming. This is a great event. Thank you. Question. Next January, after you and Dave McMurray are sworn into Congress, what is your plan for bringing jobs to Western New York and the Southern Tier?
Thank you, John. Thank you for being here. Does everyone recognize John Hurley is the chair of the Democratic Party here in Ontario County? So a little round of applause. Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, John, I think of being viable for economic development is a comprehensive issue. It's not, one little plan here or there. It takes healthy people, educated people, the right infrastructure, stewardship of your natural resources. That's when you become attractive to external investment, and then that's when they come in and start bringing jobs with them. But having already said that, let me add what the cherry on the cake is, in my view, of what Mr. Reed has done to be sure that doesn't happen in this district. We've already gone through the list, but let's make sure we're all on the same page about it. He's voted against affordable health care every single chance he has. He has done nothing for education. He's done nothing for infrastructure. He would prefer to frack us than not. So already 4 things that an investor would look to see. We're on the wrong side of it. But let's add that little cherry on the cake. How's that $10,000 cap on deduction for property taxes doing for us trying to find new investment? If you're an investor, are you going to come here and have to pay taxes on the taxes because we have high property taxes in New York State? No. So the first question brought me to something about the tax plan of 2017. Let me add one more critique I have of it. Get that $10,000 threshold out. There are some states, like New York and California, we pay a lot of taxes, but you know what? We want the services back. We want good schools, we want the health care. I'll go through the list again. And I'm okay paying my taxes, so long as I see the services coming back to working and middle-class people like you and me and my family, and not just being sucked up to the rich who do not need another penny of it. And can you believe, because I can't, that we have a representative who not merely voted for that bill, but authored it, putting in that tax threshold? Whom does that affect? Every single person in this room, whether you hit that $10,000 threshold or not. Because what it's saying is to outside investors, do not enter. And we want the opposite of that. We have the Napa Valley of the East here. We have a gorgeous district. We've got well-educated people for the most part. If you want to compare to some other states, that's where some of that tax dollars goes. But we need to do better than that. In fact, if there's one thing we could do for public education, let's start paying teachers what they deserve to get. We can, because we've had so much abundance in the history of this area, get ourselves back on track. And that's why I'm running for Congress. I want to do that.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi.
Brian Ashdown, I live here in Geneva.
Hi, Carol.
You've mentioned a little bit about immigration reform. You haven't given us a lot of detail. I mean, a lot of us have recently been focusing on what's happening at the border because it's such a mess, right? Terrible, inhumane treatment of fellow human beings. But I want to know what you have thought about immigrants in our district who often are not treated very well by our government, and what kind of ideas you have for making sure that these people who are our neighbors are able to live a humane and safe life while they're here with us.
Well, I'm fresh on that topic, Brian, because before I came here, I was over in Yates County talking with a group of literacy volunteers and a group of people from Central and South America who use their services. And of course, they had a lot of questions about this. I believe in comprehensive immigration reform. I think the immigration reform proposals that we had under the Obama administration, well, I would be happy to negotiate some aspects of it, the lottery system or not, maybe some of the quotas and so forth. I do believe that we need to have a path for citizenship for dreamers. I do believe that we should have a path for citizenship for people who have been here for over a generation and have proven to be ideal citizens, friends and neighbors to all of us. I am personal friends with Gilberto, who was picked up on what probably was an inappropriate stop a year ago, June. He was then put in detention in Batavia and then in Allegheny, which made it very difficult for his wife and 3 children to visit him. Allegheny County, it's 2.5 hours away, 2 hours away. And then ultimately he was deported in March. So I am of the belief, and you use the word, I will echo it, that separating children from their parents at the border, many of whom are coming here to seek asylum, and we have not properly funded the administration process of asylum in order to work with the people coming here, many of whom, by the way, truly are leaving areas of violence. It's matters of life and death for them to come here. And all of whom I've ever known want to work very hard, just like my Italian ancestors and my Irish ancestors who dug the canal. It's the same spirit. It's what has made this country and this culture a place where the rest of the world's eyes are upon us, and now we stand in embarrassment. We have a president whose utterances can only be interpreted as racist, and it fails to recognize not only our culture and tradition, but the responsibility that we have to be open and fair about our immigration policy. Now let me be clear about a couple of things. Every country has a border patrol. The accusation that the Republicans will make about open borders is a scurrilous thought, at least in terms of my politics. I am a pretty strong person on law and order. If you ever read any of my blogs or anything else about my work, you would detect that. And I feel just as strongly about it on a border, physical border, as I do in cyberspace. And this is another area, by the way, let me just do a little tangent. Tom Reed has done nothing to protect national security in this country. Cybersecurity is a very real issue, and Tom Reed has done nothing to help it. In fact, by coddling the president, who can only see policy through his own personal circumstances, would have us not investigate the Russian interference into our elections. And Mr. Reed has not stood up and said, we need a cybersecurity policy in this country, and it's going to begin with trying to figure out what they did in 2016, what they've done in the past, and what they're going to do in the future to undermine the integrity of our politics. But getting back now to the immigration issue, I absolutely believe that if we would reform our immigration laws to something that reflects more of the reality that we are at, the millions of people who want to come here, those who are seeking asylum, how we can integrate them into society, maintaining individual rights in the process. That is how we're going to address our immigration problem. It is not with a physical wall. It is not with taking children away from their parents at the border, just as it is not taking my friend Gilberto away from his family. They have lived here 25 years, law-abiding, good people. And now that father has been taken away from his 3 children and his wife. We need to reform our laws, and then we need to enforce them. You know, we have lots of examples historically of laws that when they are anachronistic, out of date, no longer appropriate to the culture and tradition of the society, people violate them. Think of prohibition. We need to get immigration laws up to date, which doesn't mean that they will be perfect. We can negotiate, Republicans and Democrats, and I would look forward to the opportunity, God willing, to do that. And it won't be perfect, and not everyone will be happy. I bet a law that would be appropriate would have fewer numbers than I would want and more numbers than a stereotypical Republican would want. But we can and should get to a Goldilocks, reasonable place, and then enforce those laws appropriately. But right now we are so out of sync between the reality and those laws. To simply say enforce anachronistic laws is an unreasonable approach, and it destabilizes the society furthermore to lace that approach with racist utterances. Yes.
My name is Bonnie. I live in the town of Bora. And I did want to make a comment first that I am concerned about the lack of visibility because I think I've only seen your name on 2 signs. And I think I'm getting at least 2 emails a week from Mr. Reed. I've never voted Republican in my life, but I'm getting all these emails from him. I did notice, I think, on your website or somewhere, one of the debates is going to be televised. Is it only going to be televised locally where the debate is, or will it be available and seen elsewhere, you know, in the district?
My understanding, that debate will be held in Corning. It'll be in the Corning Elmira Media Market. It probably will be uploaded as an archive. I do not know for a fact whether it will be streamed live or not. And let me say something that I mean kind of in a sweet way, but also serious. If you give me more money, you will see more of my stuff. Do you know how much a 30-second commercial costs in one of the 4 media markets that cover the geographic expanse of this district? $130,000. I just spent all day today actually filming a commercial that will go out. And we are spending, and it includes digital and cable, so don't think we didn't get a good deal. It cost $600,000. We will be very proud if on Sunday, I can tell you that since the primary, we've brought in $800,000. And I have staff, and we have to buy software, and we buy shirts, and we buy lawn signs. And still, we need to get the word out. So I hear you. We need to get the word out. But
Well,
you know,
I did make a donation online.
All right, good. Thank you.
It wasn't about nothing.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm Veronica, and I'm also from Gorham, and I just reiterate that we would love to see more signs, because there's like no visibility underneath or in our area. One of the things that this might be a silly question, but one of the things that I've really been disgusted with watching coming up to this election is how much our representatives aren't showing up to vote. Particularly, I know with Cruz, but one of the things that struck me just this past week with Tom Reed is that he made a Facebook statement that we need to believe the victims, the same day that the Kavanaugh, that before it came forward. I called his office and I asked them how he said that. I mean, I witnessed his town halls where he doesn't really advocate for women. And they told me it was because he supported the Violence Against Women's Act. Later that day, it turned out that Tom Reed didn't show up to vote for that. Yeah, he won't respond. I think somebody from him won't respond to that. He won't make a statement about Kavanaugh. It disgusts me. But what I want to know is what's your standard for showing up to vote? Because all of this talk for us is great, but it only is going to make an impact if you show up to vote. So what's your standard for yourself, and how do we know that you're going to represent us and that you're going to be there in DC to vote?
I think that's a very fair question. With respect to Mr. Reed, let me make a couple of observations. It's been my observation that Mr. Reed does the exact thing my father, when I was growing up, told me not to do. You do as you say, and you say as you do. That's what my father taught me. But Mr. Reed says one thing and does another. So I grew up in a tradition where you do as you say, and you say as you do, and I have every anticipation of showing up to vote. And all I can say as a backdrop of it is I've had a good professional career. I've shown up, and I am very proud of my children, who are good boys. I am very grateful and happy with the communities I've lived in. Some of my friends are here I've known, for many years. And they're working hard for my campaign because they know me. And I can only offer those historical anchors to demonstrate the kind of person I am. I mean, I mentioned before, I stayed in this area because I'm the only child in the family to take care of my parents. And I am so grateful that I did. It was almost sacred to be with them in some moments. And I'm really glad that my children saw that, because I think it's a good model for them.
Hi, my name is Mary. I am very concerned about the isolationist policies that are coming from Washington. And they seem to be becoming incrementally greater and larger. And the worldview of the United States seems to be dramatically changing in a negative way. It's very, very concerning. I wonder, when you are elected, that what do you believe can be done across the aisle to combat this? Because this is not the way the United States, at least as I was growing up, did business.
Yeah, that's well said, Mary. Thank you. About the aisle, I will work with anyone who wants to work with me. And again, I'll mention my past that has been in higher education as an example of it. In creating the policy framework at Cornell University, I had to work with the president and all the vice presidents, the 14 deans in all of its colleges, all of its business officers in those colleges, and the associate deans and so forth, and then 4 major constituencies: faculty, students, staff, and alumni. It's sort of like a microcosm of what you do when you're in representative government. You have stakeholders, you have constituents, and you have to work with everyone to be sure that you're grinding through the best piece of legislation that is fair, just, appropriate, that it doesn't have lingering unintended consequences in it because the language isn't quite right. And so it is a very iterative and deliberative process. And I was able to get 13 of the 14 policies that I proposed on behalf of the Vice President of IT through in this policy framework. But it took me 12 years to do it. In terms of the international scene, I do believe that we, under this president, are on the wrong track. I think the tariffs are being done whimsically, arbitrarily, and capriciously. They are being done without thoughts to the people in this country. And once again, here is another area where Mr. Reed has not stood up to the detriment of the people in this district. When asked in the very beginning, when it was about corn, soybeans, and steel, and now it's over 10,000 items and growing, the list. He was asked, isn't that tariff going to hurt your district? And his answer was, well, maybe, but I think it's more important to stand with our president. I don't. Soybean farmers in Seneca County, corn. I talked to people with regard to steel in the wine industry as well as manufacturers in Elmira, which is already suffering economically. And their profits are down in the ballpark of 40%, just because the price of steel has risen. It's done without a plan. You know, if you did want to bring steel back into this country, you don't begin with a tariff. You begin by making sure you're going to have factories that make steel, and then maybe you start to slowly build into something, but you don't suddenly cut off the accessibility of products that people need every day. So I think they're foolish, and they're growing every day.
Just to add to what you're saying, my wife works for Lowe's. She told me after the first set of tariffs was announced that Lowe's was raising its prices on 6,000 items.
Yes, sir. And so very well he's made the point. Who's going to pay for this? Consumers. Absolutely right. And I can tell you, every single farmer I talk to, and I ask them, does that 12 billion Band-Aid help you? And they say, absolutely not. And by the way, I didn't become a farmer to take a handout. They're not in favor of it. Although some of them are holding on, as Mr. Reed has advised, to believe that it's ultimately going to be okay with this president. Now, do I believe that perhaps there were some unfair or less than favorable trade deals going on for the United States? Yes. Look at our dairy farmers and what's going on. I don't believe that's the way to address it. And with respect then to the final point that you made about unilateralism versus isolationism, first of all, I think we have to be careful, because I have noticed in politics, people get hung on a word, and they don't want to take the time to define it. They don't want to take the time to talk about a gray area that might exist between and among different points, such as isolationism and unilateralism. So let me just try to go down one level and say, if I wanted to address trade with China, and I would if I were president, when I was at Cornell University working in cyber, I saw People's Republic of China hit as the major country in those years, but everyone was playing the game in cyber. But in those years that I was there, it was the People's Republic of China on our networks constantly, and probably sucked out most of the journals, the research data, and the intellectual property. So there are issues, and I want you to hear me loud and clear. I do believe there are issues we need to address. I don't believe the way the president is doing them and Reed is standing behind him is the right approach to do them. The right way, for example, with what I just spoke about, would be to exercise the kind of leadership people had expected of the United States, what you and I grew up with, to stand up and say, we're going to stop engaging in cyber warfare, which the United States has done, and we're going to begin to establish a governance framework for countries to work with, so that we can bring some law and order to this technology. The fact of the matter is, if David Sewell broke into my computer within the domestic United States, he would have broken the law. China, or Russia with our elections, there's no law that they broke. How are we going to address the behavior until we have laws that reflect what we want? So just doing these tariffs is absolutely the wrong approach, even at the level of trade. You work with your partners and say, look, this one's way out of balance. China was manipulating its currency at one point. But you work with your partners, just as I did to get those darn policies through. You work together with people who are of goodwill and an expectation that in the end it's going to be appropriate and just. And that is not the path that I see the president take, and I am very disappointed in my congressman that he doesn't stand up to it.
Could you tell me what you signed a check for? When you write a check, where do you address the check?
Tracy Mitrano for Congress.
Do you direct?
That's the best question that's been asked tonight. Thank you. Don't write it to me personally, is the main point. You could put Friends of Tracy Mitrano for Congress, Congressional Campaign. Just not to me, because then we have to give it back to you, and it takes a long time to.
I will deliver it to this lady.
My name's Kira. I'm a school psychologist and I work with really small children who are ages 4 to 6, doing counseling and working with them to develop IEPs for kids with disabilities. And I really love that you have a background in education. I want to ask you the same question I asked Tom Reed at the town hall, which is, will you fully fund the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act? To which he replied, we have a deficit. So,
You know, I love that Tom Reed authored, promoted, and got passed that tax bill that gave us a $1.9 trillion deficit, and then the next month in January voted against the budget that had in it all the social programs such as CHIP for children, child health care insurance. I will fully fund the idea. I would not have been one of the authors of or voted for what Mr. Reed did in the area of employment for people with disabilities by extending the time for accommodation. It is discrimination on an installment basis. I have an older brother who's developmentally disabled. It was as a result of accidents at birth in the mid-50s, before there was the kind of medical science we have now to help a premature birth. And he has lived in an institution since 6 months after I was born in 1958. So some of you have maybe heard me share this before, but I'll share it with those who haven't. Growing up, when my parents and I went to visit him, what I saw and experienced, I had nightmares about for the rest of my life. There was a lot that changed in the 60s into the 70s. There were court cases, maybe you know about Willowbrook, senator or Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, who has a sister who was also institutionalized, famously went to an institution on Staten Island and called it a snake pit and brought the issue out more. But the number one thing that made the difference for my brother and people such as him, people who can't speak for themselves, can't defend themselves, can't vote, was Medicaid. When federal money joined with state money, the conditions began to change. So now he lives not far from here in a group home up in Victor, and I'm his guardian. And he has good and humane treatment, and has had it now for decades. Do we want to go back to a society where people are children or adults are restrained and sitting in their waste? That's why you got to vote. That's why you've got to go door to door, and that's why you've got to help people get elected who are going to put a stop to the undermining of social programs that make this society a decent place. And we cannot go back.
Tracy, my name is Gary. I have a small business in the area. I've been in the Finger Lakes now for 10 years, and I have to say it is a magnificent area. And I've seen it grow. It's spectacular, as you say. And my own hobby is historical visiting different states. This area is fabulous. I want to comment on this gentleman over here, who made a great observation when he said at the very beginning what a tremendous presenter you are. I have watched you now about 6 times, and the first time I came away, you were heads over tails, the superior candidate. And that's what we need in DC. We need superior people, people like you who can think on your feet, coordinate thoughts, and project them. And all of that comes down to one huge thing, and that is the freedom of speech, our First Amendment. Those who worry about the Second Amendment, if we lose the First Amendment, the Second is gone. They don't carry guns in Russia. They don't carry guns in China, the people. Only the soldiers, the military. They do not have a First Amendment, freedom of speech. At this time, our freedom of speech through the newspapers is greatly being attacked. Trump understands through Putin, this is my thought, that eliminate the freedom of speech, the opportunity to get up there and talk, and us to speak out, they can then own us. Now, one of the reasons you see the Republicans not speaking out on anything is they've lost their freedom of speech. They're terrified people of losing their jobs. They've sold us out over that. And I'd like to hear what you will do to protect our freedom of speech, the First Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I do believe in our constitutional rights. I also believe, as I have watched constitutional jurisprudence over the last several years, that a very interesting direction is being taken with the First Amendment. To quote Justice Sotomayor, it's being weaponized by some of the interests in our society that I think it is important for people to check. And specifically, I am referring to large corporate interests. And I can be very specific as to how that applies to corporate finance. I came into this race concerned about cybersecurity because of my professional background and the failure of it and what it means for our national security. As I talk to people, I am 100% moved and persuaded to defend you to the utmost in areas of healthcare and education and infrastructure, basic civil rights, immigration reform, labor reform. And I mean that for farmers as much as I mean it for someone who lives in an urban setting. That said, if I could go, God willing, to Washington and wave a magic wand, the first thing I would do is to have meaningful campaign finance reform. Money has corrupted politics, and I will now share with you my most sincere interpretation about someone such as Tom Reed. You know, he grew up in modest circumstances, and he did a lot to get an education and go to law school. The choice of the business he went into would not have been mine, so let's just set that aside. But he goes to Congress, is not someone with a silver spoon in his mouth. And I think he just got overwhelmed by all the money that started coming in his door. And he did not have something to stand up to. A moral compass. But I also want to emphasize the temptation must be great. And that's what we have got to address. Now, I am standing here pledging to you that I'm too old for that. I am going to go, and I am going to do as I say and say as I do. But I do think I get it, that we have a system that is enabling someone who maybe had every best intention in the world, but now votes according to his donor base and not to the interests of the working and middle class. Now, that's a long way around to say, I do believe in the First Amendment, but you know, like anything in life, it can have an ironic twist. And right now, I am concerned about how a Supreme Court has been interpreting the First Amendment against the interests of all of us. And I think campaign finance reform and the Citizens United decision is a good example of that. On the matter of free speech, I am so deeply grateful to organizations such as the Washington Post and the New York Times and journalists who are very courageously getting out there and trying to tell the story that we all need to listen to and act on, because I do believe that our democracy is a threat. The number one threat, national security. The second threat, our income inequality gap. And then the third threat is that someone with the behaviors that we have of President Trump is both symptom and cause of what ails us. But that's why you're here tonight, because you're concerned about it. And I am very thankful for the First Amendment that protects us as we try to reset the compass of this district in this country.
So we have time for 2 more questions.
Okay.
Hello, my name is John. I'm the chapter chair for the Libertarian Party here in Ontario County. And I'm sort of curious about a couple of things that you said. I think you're right that I believe our current incumbent congressman does vote according to his donor base. I think probably the same thing happens on the Democratic side of Congress, and that's why there's such a split. I look back, because of your penchant for history, to the House of Burgesses, where representatives were sent to be able to represent their constituency, not their own opinions, or that of a bloc that they're forced into. I'd like to see, I guess, an answer to a couple of questions. How would you vote as a junior congressperson being put into that sort of big block where you're going to be pressured into voting according to the platforms of the Democratic Party, not necessarily in line with your own thinking? And then also, even I think a bigger issue, how do you make sure that your thinking corresponds with the constituency, not just Democrats, but your total constituency here in the county?
Yeah, those are great questions. Well, someone asked me before, how am I going to keep in touch with people? And that's a little bit of, like, I don't know how I would be sure, but that is how I would maintain the conversation about it. And the opinion in this district is wide. And we're not all going to agree on every point. But I certainly will listen to every point. And I'm happy to talk and debate and discuss every point. And then, yes, we live in a representative democracy, meaning that you will vote for someone whom you trust reflects your views the most in Congress. And I will pledge to you that I am not interested in falling in line to Nancy Pelosi or anybody else. I'm too old for that. I am too old for that. DCCC hasn't given me a dime. The money in this campaign has come from you. And I have raised money from more people, real people in this district than Tom Reed by far, and all the previous Democratic candidates. This is a one-district campaign. I think that's why it's important that I came from this place. I am out in Chautauqua just as much as I'm in Ontario, and Tompkins, and my own county of Yates, and down in Steuben where we have our office. I genuinely believe in a one-district campaign. And I guess it is true that I hope to represent the interests of working and middle-class people and not the 0.01%. That is where I will make a statement. But I will listen to them, and I will talk with them, and I'm not interested in the accusations being made by Mr. Reed campaign that my platforms are socialist. It's ludicrous. I am the most moderate candidate of all of the Democratic primary candidates, but I'm going to tell you something else. I am the moderate in this race, not Tom Reed. He's an extremist. I want to bring economic development to this district, and I believe that as hard as it is, it's kind of simple, and I've already laid out what you need to do for it, and he's done everything against it. He has turned his back on the people of this district because it's not a wealthy district. If he were a representative in downtown Manhattan, I could understand his policies better because it's filled with millionaires and billionaires. But that is not the constituency of this district. And I want to represent this district because this is where I have lived all my life. And that's the best way that I can say it. You know, time will tell. We will see. But I can only speak to what has been the work I've done professionally and so forth. And I don't think anyone at Cornell would accuse me of, well, never mind. Not expressing my point of view.
I'm Geneva resident.
I can't hear you.
It should be on. Can you speak a little louder?
Okay. My name is Joan Patangelo. No? Close to your mouth. I don't sing a lot. But it's louder. Can you hear me now?
Not very
Okay.
Speak
Speak louder. Anyway, I'm from Geneva, but I also have an interest in early childhood education and maternal health, what's best for families. You know, daycare, if you go to a daycare center, a typical daycare center costs families about $24,000. I mean, people are spending what you spend on college education, paid family leave, all those topics. I'm going to touch on early childhood education.
Oh,
I want to hear your views.
On early childhood education. You know, I think it would be a really healthy approach if we viewed policy through the eyes of what it means to a child. I try to take that view, and that is a view that I've taken 20 years ago when I taught family and social policy. And what's interesting to me is that in those years from 96 to 2001, in the courses that I taught, we talked about affordable health care, we talked about child care, we talked about Family Medical Leave Act, we talked about wages, living wage, and you know what's fair and what's appropriate. In other words, we have not properly addressed these issues that have been roiling us for even more than 20 years, certainly in the circumstance of health care. All of them relate intimately to children. So if we want to look at something such as daycare through the eyes of a child, we want to be sure that we have quality daycare. And if that means that we have to have a social program that helps manage that, that's what we should do. And by the way, we almost had one under, hold on to your seats, President Nixon. And it got pulled out from under us. The savage inequalities that I've seen in public education in this district, and by the way, I'm using the name of a book that I used to teach in that class, is stuff that would make you cry. When we live in a society where we could give every child an amazing education. We have the teachers, we have the resources, we have the schools, we have the money. We don't have the social policy to realize it. And I'm sorry to have to draw a contrast, but this is a campaign. You're not going to get it with Mr. Reed in office. I could go on and I'd be happy to talk about, you know, all of those areas. We had a forum in the primary in Ithaca on exactly this topic. And it was hosted by some people at one of the community centers as well as some pediatricians in the area who are very concerned that social policy, the way it is being enacted now, has gotten so far away from the interests of children who don't have a voice. And I would very much want to be someone who brings that voice back. Even just in the following observation I'll share with you. Why after Sandy Hook did we really do nothing about it? But then we started to talk more after Parkland. Yes, it might be because of the accretion of events, but it's because those children didn't have a voice. and older children do, and they're closer to being voters. Think about that. But as parents, as teachers, as representatives, as adults, we have a responsibility to take care of our children. And then one last thought. I had a professor of ancient Roman society that made a remark that stayed with me all these years. In talking about the decline and fall of Roman civilization, he said it only takes one generation for literacy to stop. And it's true with values and information and literacy and traditions and culture. It takes one generation. And we are not going to be that generation. That's why I'm running for office. That's why you're here tonight. And I hope earnestly you will stand with me right on through November 6th. Thank you very much for everything tonight.
Thank you all so much for being here. If you would like to take a yard sign, there's some right over there. If you would like to sign up to volunteer, we have sign-up sheets over there as well. Please be in touch with the campaign. You can connect with us over our website, congress.com. That has another link where you can also sign up for our newsletter. Thank you.